Parents of tweens, if you're familiar with far-off drop-offs...
Dad, stop, right here.
Or get DMs about what's for dinner, you may be experiencing tween milestones. For your son or daughter, these can start at age 9. HPV vaccination, a type of cancer prevention against certain HPV-related cancers, can start then too.
For most, HPV clears on its own. But for those who don't clear the virus, it can cause certain cancers later in life.
Embrace this phase. Help protect them in the next.
Ask their doctor today about HPV vaccination. Brought to you by Merck.
Running a business comes with a lot of what-ifs. But luckily, there's a simple answer to them. Shopify. It's the commerce platform behind millions of businesses, including Thrive Cosmetics and Momofuku. And it'll help you with everything you need. From website design and marketing to boosting sales and expanding operations, Shopify can get the job done and make your dream a reality. Turn those what-ifs into... Sign up for your $1 per month trial at shopify.com/special offer.
In early January 1994, the serenity of Northern California's coast was shattered by a gruesome discovery. A hiker trekking near Slide Ranch just north of Muir Beach in Marin County stumbled upon the battered body of a woman at the bottom of a hill alongside this very desolate stretch of Highway 1. It took a few days, but the victim was soon identified as 42-year-old Sopha Wonggoun, and she was 8 months pregnant at the time of her death. A later autopsy would reveal that Sopha had been bludgeoned to death, and it was consistent, the blows on her head were consistent with a hammer strike, and her body had been wrapped tightly in a sleeping bag, and apparently it had been rolled down the remote embankment. It was a shocking and heinous crime scene, one that left investigators and the community as a whole horrified at the brutality inflicted on this mother and her unborn child. Even more alarming was what followed this discovery. As authorities worked to identify the body and notify the next of kin, they learned that Sopha's husband, Technical Sergeant Sonar Wonggoun, who went by Shorty, he was a U.S. Air Force tech sergeant, well, it had seemed like he vanished. Wonggoun was an 18-year tech sergeant stationed at Travis Air Force Base in California, and by all accounts, he was a disciplined military man, not someone you would expect to flee from the law. Yet, mysteriously, within the days of Sopha's body being found, Sonar Wonggoun had disappeared without a trace, leaving behind the couple's 2 young children. And in addition to leaving behind a dead wife and 2 young kids, he left a swirl of unanswered questions. Investigators immediately feared the worst. They feared that the devoted Air Force sergeant was in fact a killer on the run. In the coming days, as evidence mounted and an arrest warrant was prepared, Sonar Wonggoun slipped out of the country, launching what would become a 12-year international manhunt that would captivate both military and law enforcement agencies around the world. Welcome back, True Crime Army. I am your host, Margot, and today's case is about one of the Air Force's most wanted criminals. Or he was wanted back then. Before I begin, I just wanted to remind everyone that I am now releasing episodes in audio and video format. So be sure that you catch each episode however you prefer. Also, tap that subscribe button wherever you're listening or watching so you never miss a new deep dive. With that, join me today as I bring you the gripping true story of Technical Sergeant Sonar Wonggoun. This story has it all. A fugitive, a relentless search that spans over a decade and crossed continents, and the fight for justice for Sopha Wonggoun and her unborn baby. This is a tale of love and betrayal, of a crime that rocked both a family and a military community, and of the long road to holding a killer accountable. Now, let's dig in.
Military murder is an independent project and is not endorsed by the Department of Defense or any military component. The views expressed are those of the host. The content of this podcast is not meant to be legal or medical advice. Warning, this episode contains graphic details of murder and is not suitable for young listeners. Listener discretion is advised.
Sonar Wonggoun's life in 1994, at least on the surface, resembled that of many career servicemen. Born in rural Nangkok Nayok, Thailand, pretty sure I butchered that, I'm sorry, Sonar had moved to the United States in his early adulthood and made a life for himself in his adopted country. He enlisted in the U.S. Air Force in 1976 and earned his American citizenship in 1978, proudly serving his new nation. By 1994, he was an experienced air cargo supervisor at Travis Air Force Base, which, if you don't know, is located between San Francisco and Sacramento, and he had spent 18 years in uniform. By all accounts, being a good airman. Friends and colleagues knew Shorty, as he was nicknamed, as a hardworking tech sergeant dedicated to his duties. He was, by all outward appearances, a disciplined military man with a stable family life. Saner married Sopha Wonggoun in 1981. Like her husband, Sopha was a Thai immigrant who had become a naturalized U.S. citizen. And the pair, well, they built a life together in California. They settled in base housing at Travis Air Force Base, and that's where they were raising their 2 children, a son and a daughter. Neighbors and friends saw the Wonggouns as a normal family on base. And the thing is that there was no public hint of the dark tensions that were brewing behind closed doors. In fact, no one could have predicted the violence that would erupt in that home. Even Saner and Sopha's daughter, she later testified that she had never seen her father behave violently or even aggressively toward her mother before 1994, like before she had actually been found. But listen, as would later come to light, the Wonggoun marriage was deeply troubled. Financial stress weighed on the family. Sopha had developed a serious gambling habit, allegedly racking up over $20,000 in gambling debt, and that really strained their finances. The intimacy in the marriage had also basically frayed. Saner would claim that by 1993, he and Sopha were no longer sharing a bed as husband and wife. And unbeknownst to Saner at the time, Sopha apparently began a relationship with another man. At least one of their children became aware of Sopha's boyfriend, and shortly before this tragedy, their daughter may have inadvertently informed her father about her mother's secret affair. All of this turmoil remained behind closed doors, but it set the stage for what would become an explosive confrontation. On January 7, 1994, a tourist hiking in a remote coastal area near Slide Ranch, just north of Muir Beach, came upon a horrifying sight. The body of a woman wrapped in a bloodied sleeping bag and dumped on the hillside. Marin County Sheriff's detectives rushed to the scene, where the victim's injuries immediately indicated foul play. The woman had been savagely beaten about the head, and the brutality of the wounds was later determined to match the shape of a hammer. Detectives also noted the victim's advanced state of pregnancy. You see, she appeared to be kind of at the end of her pregnancy, like 8 or 9 months pregnant. This meant that the perpetrator had not only killed the woman, but effectively claimed the life of an unborn child as well. It didn't take long for the Marin County coroner to identify the body as Sopha Wonggoun, a resident of Travis Air Force Base, which was roughly 50 miles away. Because Sopha's remains were discovered off-base on public land, the Marin County Sheriff's Department took the lead on the homicide investigation, but they worked in tandem with the Air Force Law Enforcement Agency, OSI. Detective Stephen Nash from Marin County and agents from the Air Force Office of Special Investigations, they began piecing together Sopha's last known movements. They learned that Sopha lived on base at Travis Air Force Base, and she lived there with her husband, Technical Sergeant Saner Wonggoun, in addition to their 2 children. Immediately, efforts were made to contact Saner, to both notify him, like, hey, we found your wife and she's dead, and also to question him about the circumstances surrounding his wife's death. But what they found raised even more red flags. When investigators reached out to Travis Air Force Base, they discovered that Saner Wonggoun was nowhere to be found. In fact, he had not been seen on base for days. According to Air Force authorities, Wonggoun had abruptly requested emergency leave right around the time that Sopha's body was discovered. The urgency of his leave was super suspicious. He claimed that there was a family emergency overseas, and in reality, as detectives would soon learn, Tech Sergeant Wonggoun had used that head start to flee the country. He had packed up his bags, driven to San Francisco International Airport, and left his vehicle in short-term parking, all the while boarding a one-way flight out of the United States. Flight records showed that on January 14th, 1994, exactly 1 week after Sopha's body had been found, Saner Wonggoun arrived in Bangkok, Thailand. Meanwhile, back in California, the pieces were coming together in a very disturbing way. Saner had been the primary suspect from the jump. I mean, It's common sense. Why the heck would he leave his kids with his neighbors and just flee the country, right? Investigators obtained a search warrant for the Wonggoun residence on Travis Air Force Base, and that search yielded evidence confirming their suspicions, such as signs of a violent struggle, blood traces. This was all something that wasn't publicized, but we can only imagine what they found. Critical facts did emerge, though. Sopha was last seen alive at her house on January 6, 1994, and evidence suggests that she was likely killed that same day, perhaps even inside of her base housing, a house or apartment or wherever she lived. And that timeline aligned with Sanor's sudden departure. Moreover, Wonggoun's actions spoke volumes. He left his 2 kids in the care of a neighbor, telling the neighbor, hey, hold on to the kids. Eventually, you're just going to transfer them to a family friend. What the heck? It was as if he knew that he wasn't coming back anytime soon, and definitely not to pick up his kids. That's when Sanor vanished onto a flight overseas, all before law enforcement even had the chance to knock on his door. Authorities were now dealing with a murder suspect on the run, and one with a significant head start. An arrest warrant was drafted and issued for Sopha Wonggoun, but by then, he was beyond its immediate reach, having fled to his native Thailand. The case that began with the discovery of Sopha's body had now transformed into an international fugitive hunt. The Air Force Office of Special Investigations, AFOSI, which handles felony-level crimes involving Air Force personnel, they took on a major role once he became a fugitive. OSI officially named Tech Sergeant Sopha Wonggoun as the Air Force's #1 fugitive, putting him at the top of their most wanted list. In the coming weeks, a composite picture of the crime emerged. Investigators believed that on January 6, Sanor confronted his wife Sopha at their home, a confrontation that quickly turned deadly. After killing her, likely with a hammer blow to the head, Sanor wrapped her body in a sleeping bag, transported it through his car to a remote coastal area, and dumped her down the hillside to conceal the crime. Then, in the brief window before Sopha's identity and police circling back in to, figure out who she was, that's when Sanor orchestrated his escape. The meticulous disposal of the body and the quick getaway suggested a very methodical effort to cover up his actions, which prosecutors would later point to as evidence of calculation. But in those early days, one crucial element remained elusive: the motive. Why did he do it? Quote, "We don't know anything about motive," end quote. And that was said by Captain Christine Millett of the Air Force OSI. That's what she told reporters. She continued, quote, "That will all come out in the trial," end quote. For the moment, the priority for law enforcement was clear. Sopha Wonggoun had to be found and brought back to face justice in the United States. But tracking him down would prove to be an arduous task, one that stretched on for years and years, and it spanned multiple continents. I didn't start investing until I was well into adulthood. And I'll be honest, I was kind of scared of it. I used to think investing was only for people who had thousands of dollars just laying around or who really knew what they were doing. And every time the market dipped, I had instant panic. But over time, I realized something. Building financial wellness isn't about how much you make. It's about making the most of what you have. That's where Acorns comes in. You've heard me talk about Acorns before, and guess what? Today's episode is sponsored by Acorns. Acorns is a financial wellness app that makes it easy to start saving and investing for your future. You don't need to be rich. Acorns lets you get started with the spare money that you've got right now, even if all you've got is spare change. You don't need to be an expert. Acorns recommends a diversified portfolio that can help you weather all of the market's ups and downs. And honestly, you just need to stick with it. And Acorns helps you do that, automatically investing your money and giving it a chance to grow over time. For me, Acorns took away the guesswork. It gave me the confidence to get started without needing to have everything perfectly figured out. And I wish I had started sooner. Sign up now and join the over 14 million all-time customers who have already saved and invested over $25 billion with Acorns. Visit acorns.com/militarymama or download the Acorns app to get started today. Paid non-client endorsement. Compensation provides incentive to positively promote Acorns. Tier 1 compensation provided. Investing involves risk. Acorns Advisors, LLC, an SEC-registered investment advisor. View important disclosures at acorns.com/militarymama.
Psst. Hey, besties, listen up. I have a secret to tell you. LinkedIn now has improved the job search experience for nurses. Search by your specialty, the shifts you want to work, and the salary that you want to make. With so many employers hiring on LinkedIn, finding the perfect job is even more simplified. So don't spend months searching. Go to linkedin.com/nurses and find out why in the past year, more than 1.5 million nurses have used LinkedIn to search for their next role. That's linkedin.com/nurses.
Once Saner Wonggoun landed in Thailand in January of 1994, he effectively dropped off the radar. He had escaped to his country of birth, a place where he had family roots and possibly connections that would help him hide. Immediately, the challenge for the U.S. became daunting. Extraditing a fugitive from Thailand, especially one who held Thai citizenship in addition to American citizenship, well, that can be a very complex process. The U.S. government had no immediate leverage to detain Wonggoun on foreign soil. And in the 1990s, it was much harder to track someone without today's digital trail, right? You didn't have the internet of, today. As one Air Force agent put it, the trail went cold. After January 14th, 1994, there were no confirmed sightings of Wonggoun. There were no credit card records. He was smart enough not to even use his U.S. accounts. Nothing. It was as if this man had vanished into the Thai countryside. From the perspective of the Air Force investigators, this case became a long-term pursuit. OSI agents liaisoned with Thai authorities and international agencies like the FBI, but year after year after year, there was no breakthrough. Wonggoun had the advantage of time and local familiarity. In fact, he later revealed just how careful he was. You see, after fleeing the U.S., he never withdrew a single dollar of his $81,700 in savings from any American bank, fearing, of course, that transaction could reveal his location. In Thailand, he lived frugally and he kept a pretty low profile, working menial jobs for cash. He even resorted to selling charcoal in rural markets just to get by. The fugitive sergeant had effectively gone to ground and he stayed invisible for nearly 12 years. Meanwhile, the case was never forgotten by those back home in California. Within OSI, Saner Wonggoun's name remained at the top of the wanted list. Whenever there was a lead, agents tried to run them down through the U.S. Embassy in Bangkok or Thai law enforcement, but nothing panned out for a long time. By the mid-2000s, with Wonggoun still unaccounted for, the Air Force decided to amplify its efforts. In October of 2006, OSI made a renewed push to draw the fugitive out. They held a high-profile press conference on October 27, 2006, announcing an increased reward. The U.S. was offering $25,000, which is equivalent to about 1 million Thai baht. They were offering this for information leading to Wonggoun's capture. Perhaps most crucially, though, they also unveiled age-progressed images, essentially photographs and sketches projecting what the then 59-year-old Wonggoun might look like after so many years in hiding. And these images were circulated widely in Thai media. The message was clear. The Air Force's most wanted man was likely still in Thailand, and they weren't giving up on finding him. Captain Christine Millet, an OSI spokeswoman, emphasized how determined investigators were to solve this case. Quote, "We have really been pushing the last couple of months to try and find this guy. And we had some really, really hardcore agents in Thailand trying to find him," end quote. And this was what Millet told the press in late 2006, right? So the persistence, though, paid off. The media blitz caught the attention of someone who had a clue about this elusive charcoal seller. In early November 2006, a Thai woman in a region about 200 miles north of Bangkok, well, she contacted the police with a tip. She recognized the man in the age-progressed photo. He was an older fellow who went by an alias and sold charcoal at a local market. She had seen him recently, and something about him clicked when she saw the fugitive's image on the news. Acting swiftly on the tip, the Royal Thai Police organized a sting. On November 3rd, 2006, which remember, the press conference happened on October 26th or something like that, right? So on November 3rd, 2006, Thai authorities descended on the market in Phitsanulok, So among the stalls of vendors, when they searched, they spotted a man who matched the description of Saner. After 12 years on the run, Saner Wonggoun was finally in custody. He was arrested at about 2:30 p.m. local time without incident. The news was electrifying for all the agencies involved. This is a great day now that we have the Air Force's #1 fugitive in custody. And that's a quote proclaimed by Brigadier General Dana Simmons, who was the AFOSI commander at the time. His jubilation was palpable. The Air Force had never stopped hunting Wonggoun, and now he was finally caught. General Simmons praised the collaborative effort that led to the capture, noting that, quote, Wonggoun's capture is a culmination of a lot of work done by the Thai government, the local police in California, the State Department, the FBI, ICE, and OSI. It truly had been an international effort, and credit was especially due to the Thai police who pursued the tip. Quote, we owe a tremendous amount of gratitude to the Royal Thai Police, who put a lot of effort into this investigation, end quote. That was something that Simmons added when he was saying this, and he was very grateful. I mean, you have to imagine, working with international partners is not always easy, and this was a huge win for the Air Force. With Wonggoun in Thai custody, the case entered a new phase. After years of silence, Saner himself began to speak, first to Thai authorities and then to local media. According to Thai news reports, once arrested, Wonggoun confessed to what he had done back in 1994. Full confession, guys. He allegedly admitted outright, yeah, I killed my wife. He told police that he bludgeoned her with a hammer after learning that she was 8 months pregnant, and he knew for a fact that he could not be the father. He also tried to explain or perhaps justify his actions by airing their private troubles. He claimed that Sopha had a severe gambling addiction that had drained their finances. I mean, she hadn't drained it so much because they still had $81,000. But anyway, if they had $100,000 and now they had 80, he was pretty pissed about it, right? He also said that she had essentially estranged herself from him, meaning basically no sex, for over a year, despite living under the same roof. Now, in those first few statements, Wonggoun seemed to be painting a picture of himself. He was painting a picture of himself as a man pushed to a breaking point by infidelity and money problems, right? Yet he also expressed something that hadn't been heard before. He expressed regret and despair. In an interview that was later published in the Phuket Gazette, Wonggoun described his 12 years as a fugitive in haunting terms. He said, quote, I have been living in misery all along. I have been living on given time. No happiness or anything at all, end quote. That was what he lamented while he was interviewed at a Thai jail. He even claimed to have attempted to take his own life several times while on the run. Now, these words painted the picture of a man who did not find freedom in escape, but rather a different kind of prison, one of guilt, fear, and isolation. Whether he said this, out of remorse or simply fatigue from years of looking over his shoulder, Saner Wonggoun did not deny his crimes. Now, once he had been captured, the focus shifted to bringing him back to the United States to account for Sopha's murder, right? And once he was brought back to the U.S., he could finally face a court-martial. Capturing Wonggoun was a major victory, but there were still hurdles to overcome. At the time of his arrest in 2006, Wonggoun was 59 years old and he held dual citizenship. Remember, he was a Thai citizenship and an American citizen. He immediately resisted being extradited to the U.S. Yeah, not a shocker. He insisted that he should be treated as a Thai citizen and dealt with under Thai law. And the thing is that it's not unusual for fugitives to fight extradition because doing so can, 1, delay legal proceedings, and 2, in some cases, the suspect's hope is to be tried in a country where penalties, they might be a little loosey-goosey, as my partner in crime, Tabitha, would say. Anyway, Thailand, for instance, does not have a first-degree murder charge equivalent to that in the U.S., right? Where you could get a life sentence or the death penalty for a crime. So it's no wonder that he wanted to be tried in Thailand. Wonggoun also likely knew that he could persuade Thai authorities to keep him there and that he might face far less consequences, or, even that he could just protract this legal limbo and eventually everybody would just forget and move on with it. But people don't typically forget about murder cases, right? But the U.S. was steadfast. They were seeking to bring Wonggoun back under the Uniform Code of Military Justice. I mean, this is a guy, he comes to the U.S., he joins the military, he serves for 18 years, and now he's like, I don't want anything to do with the U.S., right? No can do, amigo. Since Wonggoun was an active duty Air Force member at the time of the alleged murder, the military did have jurisdiction, especially if the crime was determined to have occurred on Travis Air Force Base, which is federal property. In the eyes of the U.S., Saner Wonggoun was to be court-martialed for premeditated murder, and the stakes of that charge were made clear. Quote, Wonggoun will be court-martialed on charges of premeditated murder and could face the death penalty if convicted, end quote. And that was what Captain Christine Millet announced after his arrest. Under the military law, a conviction for premeditated murder can indeed carry a sentence of life imprisonment or even the death penalty. This was not a case the U.S. was taking lightly, right? They were preparing to prosecute it to the fullest extent of the law. Thai authorities had to consider the extradition request carefully. Throughout 2007, Wonggoun remained jailed in Thailand as his case went through the country's legal system. But finally, in December of 2007, Thai's appeals court issued a decisive ruling. Because the killing took place on U.S. soil and Wonggoun is a U.S. citizen, he should be handed over to the United States to face justice. Essentially, the Thai court, basically, they were like, we are going to step out of this situation. We are not going to keep him here in Thailand. The American justice and the military justice has a rightful claim to this guy, and we are going to hand him over. I mean, it's worth noting that extraditions do sometimes come with conditions. For example, countries like Thailand will often seek assurances that a fugitive is not going to face a death penalty if extradited. Publicly available records for this case do not detail whether such an assurance was given, but the outcome, which I will tell you here in a little bit, suggests that all parties were satisfied that proceeding with a U.S. court-martial was the most appropriate action in this case. And with that, on February 15th, 2008, Saner Wonggoun was officially transferred back to U.S. custody. A team from OSI Detachment 303 escorted Saner on a flight back from Bangkok to California, returning him to Travis Air Force Base, the very place that he had fled 14 years earlier. 14 years, that's like insane. Upon arrival, Saner was placed in confinement to await military legal proceedings. At this point, an interesting judicial formality occurred. Because Air Force investigators believed that the murder had actually been committed on Travis Air Force Base property, meaning like inside their home on base, the local civilians, meaning California, specifically from Marin County, they formally relinquished jurisdiction to the Air Force. In other words, any potential California state murder charges were set aside so that the case could be pursued entirely within the military court system. This cleared the way for the court-martial of Technical Sergeant Wonggoun to begin. On March 19, 2008, just a few weeks after Wonggoun's return, Air Force prosecutors convened an Article 32 hearing, and that hearing took place at Travis Air Force Base. Now, an Article 32 hearing is essentially a fact-finding proceeding. It's not really meant to be, but it's under the UCMJ, and you evaluate whether probable cause exists to charge the accused and to move forward to a court-martial, right? So it's equivalent to a grand jury hearing. Think of it as the military's way of making sure that there's a legitimate case to be had. Witness testimony is heard, evidence is reviewed by an investigating officer who then makes a recommendation to the convening authority. Now, the hearing for Wonggoun lasted 2 days, the Article 32 hearing, it lasted 2 days, and it provided the first detailed look at the evidence and testimony that had been collected since 1994, and now we also had his confession, right? Major Tara Villena represented the prosecution, and Major Mark Etheridge served as Wonggoun's defense counsel. Key witnesses were called to testify about both the crime and its context. Detective Stephen Nash of the Marin County Sheriff's Department took the stand, and he recounted how Sopha's body was found and the early stages of the investigation back, 14 years earlier in 1994. His testimony helped establish the timeline and the circumstances of the crime scene, critical information for setting the foundation of this case. But perhaps the most emotionally charged testimony at the 32 hearing came from the Wonggoun's own daughter. She was now 21 years old, and her name was Sophia Wonggoun Bertram. Despite the many years that had passed, Sophia had been old enough in 1994. I'm assuming that she was like 6 or 7 at the time. But she recalled the turmoil in her family around the time of her mom's death. This woman bravely recounted a haunting detail on the stand. She said that she might have inadvertently been the catalyst for that fatal confrontation. Sophia testified that shortly before her mother's death, she had told her father about her mother's boyfriend, likely not realizing at the time with her young age how explosive that information could have been, even for the most calm human being. One can only imagine the weight of that revelation for this girl, a daughter realizing that a casual comment may have triggered her father's deadly rage. Which, listen, it's not your fault. Your father is a grown-ass man who could have controlled himself and moved on, but he chose not to. But anyway, let me relax here. This testimony was crucial for the defense as well, because it did support the narrative that TSgt Wonggoun acted in the heat of passion, provoked by learning of his wife's infidelity rather than through cold premeditation. And not only did he learn about her premeditation, she was 8 months pregnant, right? Sophia also noted that she had never seen her father, never seen her father behave violently toward her mother before that incident. And she didn't actually witness the incident that I know of. And this also bolstered the idea that the killing was an aberration fueled by a sudden emotional upheaval. After hearing the testimonies and reviewing the evidence, Colonel Stephen Ellenbeck, the investigating officer presiding over this hearing, he weighed the arguments. The purpose was not to determine guilt or innocence, as that's not what the Article 32 hearing is for, but to assess whether the case was strong enough to merit a court-martial. Unsurprisingly, given the evidence of flight and Wonggoun's own apparent admissions, Colonel Ellenbeck found that there was probable cause on all counts. The hearing concluded with a recommendation to proceed to a general court-martial for the charges against Wonggoun. With that decision, the path was cleared for a full trial. The Air Force would formally charge TSgt Wonggoun with the premeditated murder of his wife and implicitly the unlawful killing of the unborn child that she carried. Now, that wasn't a double charge. That was just kind of something that was in the background of the trial. The case would be heard at Travis Air Force Base, bringing the story full circle to where it all began. In the months between the Article 32 hearing and the court-martial, both prosecution and defense readied their strategies. Prosecutors were aiming to prove that Wonggoun had deliberately and with forethought murdered his wife, Sopha, which was a capital offense. However, they were not seeking the death penalty. The defense, though, they were preparing to acknowledge that Wonggoun, he did kill his wife, but they wanted to frame it as a voluntary manslaughter, an unlawful killing in the heat of passion provoked by circumstances which carries a much lighter sentence than premeditated murder. The outcome of voluntary manslaughter or premeditated murder, well, that would hinge on the nuanced details of Wonggoun's state of mind and actions on that fateful day.
Every journey I take leaves a lasting impact. Traveling the world only makes me realize just how much more there is to explore.
No one builds a legacy by standing still. Start your journey at remova.com.
The rural way of life is about making everyone feel at home. Tractor Supply chose advanced 5G solutions from T-Mobile for Business to transform intelligent customer service. Together, we put the power of AI to work across 2,200 stores, keeping things running seamlessly inside, curbside, and countryside. This is elevated customer experience. This is Tractor Supply with T-Mobile for Business. Take your business further at T-Mobile.com/now.
Tech Sergeant Wonggoun's general court-martial began on July 28, 2008 at Travis Air Force Base. In a military trial, the accused has the option to be tried by a panel of military members, which is a jury, and it can be enlisted or officer members if it's an enlisted person, or they could be tried by a military judge alone. Wonggoun chose to be tried by a judge alone. I mean, that was good on him, right? Because he was probably hoping for a more measured evaluation of the complex emotions involved in this case, right? He murdered, or he killed, let's say, a pregnant woman, right? So you show that to a jury, they might be really, really upset, and they might not understand the nuances between voluntary manslaughter and first-degree murder. So that's what he went with. Now, Colonel William Byrd, which was a senior military judge at the time, he presided over the trial, and he would ultimately serve as the finder of fact in this case. In a surprising move, at the very start of the trial, Sagar Wonggoun entered a plea of guilty. But wait, he did not plead guilty as charged. Instead, he pled guilty to the charge of voluntary manslaughter. This plea was part of the defense strategy. You see, essentially, Wonggoun was admitting that he killed Sopha, but he was denying that he did it with premeditation. In civil courts, plea bargaining might allow a defendant to plead guilty to a lesser charge in exchange for dropping the higher charge. And that's possible also in military, but it's nuanced. But in this case, the military system didn't work that way. There was a technical sergeant by the name of Don Osborne who was helping with the prosecution, and he explained it this way. He said, quote, "Unlike a civilian trial, it's not like a plea bargain. He doesn't get to choose," end quote. And what he meant by that was that Wonggoun's plea of guilty to voluntary manslaughter was noted, but the trial would still proceed so that the judge could hear all the evidence and decide whether to accept that lesser charge, the plea to that lesser charge, or convict on the charge of murder. I know, that was a mouthful. In essence, despite this guy pleading guilty to voluntary manslaughter, the prosecution could still proceed to attempt to prove up the charges. From the outset, Colonel Byrd made sure that Wonggoun understand the gravity of what he was admitting to and what he could potentially face by pleading guilty, even if it was just pleading guilty in part, right? So under questioning by the judge, which is a standard procedure when a defendant in a military trial pleads guilty, they ask some questions to ensure that this person is coming into this guilty plea knowingly and voluntarily without someone kind of like forcing them to do so. When the judge questioned him, Wonggoun recounted in his own words what happened on January 6, 1994. We can always assume from the evidence what happened, but when someone actually tells you what happens in their own words, I feel like it's always just more gut-wrenching, right? So at the court-martial, while he's pleading guilty, this is the first time that we get a full narrative of the crime articulated from the perpetrator's perspective under oath, and it's chilling. So Wonggoun's voice filled the courtroom as he finally described the sequence of events that led to his wife's death, right? So he explained that the confrontation with Sopha was not planned. It arose from a heated argument that erupted that particular day, January 6th, just happened to be the day. Wonggoun revealed that two key factors fueled his rage: money and betrayal. First, he stated that he had been frustrated and angry over Sopha's gambling problem. Over the years that they had been together, she had accumulated over $20,000 in gambling debts. And he said that that strained their family finances and caused frequent arguments. Second, he said that on that day, January 6th, he learned that Sopha was pregnant. And he told the court, listen, she was pregnant, but I was 100% sure that that was not my child. You see, they had not slept together in over a year. And the realization that his wife not only had a lover, but was carrying that man's baby was, in Wonggoun's account, the breaking point. It ignited a fury in him that he claimed, I became uncontrollable. According to Wonggoun's testimony, upon being confronted with this bombshell news, he snapped. He went to a storage area of their home and grabbed a claw hammer. And that's when he lashed out on Sopha. He admitted, quote, I hit her one time and she fell on the floor. And after that, I realized what I did. I lost control of myself. Everything was just dark, end quote. Wonggoun recounted all of this to the judge. In that instant, he said that he struck his wife over the head with the hammer. He described the aftermath as almost just being in a haze, as if he was in a blackout rage. He said it was never his intention to kill her. Rather, he acted in a blind fury. Quote, I was mad. I wanted to teach her a lesson, end quote. He admitted this candidly, right? And it's so interesting, right? That people want to teach other people a lesson. Like, why don't we teach you a lesson? Like, move on, find someone else, let people survive and live, right? But listen, the thing was, He hit her once. She fell to the ground. He basically got blacked out. And it's unclear whether it was a first hit or how many hits in. Whatever it was, that hammer delivered a catastrophic injury to Sopha, right? So she collapsed. She was fatally wounded. And, one can imagine, actually, no, I can't imagine being in this situation. But, it's a small house. There's a 42-year-old woman. She's 8 months pregnant. She's crumbled on the floor. This man is probably shocked, like, holy crap, what have I done? I've served 18 years in the military. My career is over. And he's absolutely shocked, trying to figure out what the heck he's going to do now, right? So Wonggoun detailed what happened next. And he basically says, I panicked. He attempted to cover up the crime. And this part of his testimony aligns with the evidence that was gathered in 1994. He says that he cleaned up the blood as best that he could. He wrapped her lifeless body in a sleeping bag, and under the cover of darkness, he carried her to the car. I didn't put this in the script, but he ends up killing her. He hides her body because I'm not sure if it was when the kids were home or the kids had returned home from school that day, but he basically puts the kids to sleep. He's like, oh, hush, go to sleep or whatever. And then that's when he uses the guise of night or the disguise of night to load her body into the car. If my memory serves me correctly, again, I did not write this in my script, but he placed her body in a trash can, and that's how he moved her. But don't quote me on that, although I'm 97% sure that's how he moved her body. And so in the dead of night, on a lonely road by Muir Beach, he disposed of his wife's body. He basically, ditched her down an embankment and left her there for strangers to find. And after that, that's when he went back home to be with his kids. Now, in the following days, that's when Wonggoun set his escape plan in motion. He arranged for emergency leave at work, left his kids with a neighbor, basically saying, they're going to be with you for a few days, and then I'll send a family friend to get them. And then he fled to Thailand. Now, in court, this narrative was a double-edged sword. On one hand, it was an admission of guilt. Wonggoun was laying out all the elements of the crime, which could help satisfy the judge that he indeed committed the offense. A necessary step if the judge were to accept a manslaughter plea. On the other hand, every detail also corroborated the prosecution's case for premeditation. He didn't have the hammer right then and there in that instant when he found out his wife was pregnant, right? And he also mentioned that he had been stewing about how she had been spending all his money. And maybe it was a realization that not only is she spending all my money, but now she's hooking up with some dude and she's carrying his baby, that he then stepped away from the room, retrieved a hammer, and then came back, right? So what he is saying is also playing into the prosecution's theory that he was being methodical, that he went and got the hammer. He then confronted her again. We don't really know how that went down, but we could see a scenario where he could have had an extra couple of seconds to consider in his mind, should I do what I am about to do? So all these actions that he takes, he hides her body, shoos the kids away, he dumps her body. It does suggest some rational planning at some point, either before the act, during the act, and then after the act. It does show, a complete loss of control, but the prosecution is going to use this as showing hey, he could have controlled himself. Major Tara Vilena, who is the prosecutor, she honed in on these points during her argument. She argued to the court that Saner Wonggoun's actions were not a momentary lapse, but a deliberate, considered series of decisions. She said, quote, he's not going from 0 to 102 seconds, end quote. She basically was saying this to cast doubt on the idea that this was purely a crime of passion case. She pointed out how Wonggoun had been stewing over the couple's money issues and marital problems for some time, implying that the murder could have been a culmination of that simmering anger. In other words, a planned solution to his frustrations, right? Furthermore, the prosecution highlighted Wonggoun's methodical and systematic cleanup and disposal of Sopha's body as strong evidence that he was thinking clearly and coldly after the killing, not in a panicked haze. But I don't know, for me, when I think about this case, I think it could be both. These were the behaviors of a man who understood exactly what he was doing, she contended, which is the essence of premeditation. So the defense, led by Major Mark Etheridge, countered by emphasizing Wonggoun's emotional state. They leaned into the very human story of a military man overcome by anger and betrayal, right? Wonggoun's own testimony, his frank, remorseful explanation was the cornerstone of their case. The defense argued, listen, Judge, this is a classic case of heat of passion triggered by provocation, learning of the pregnancy by another man. And it was exacerbated by Sopha's alleged misdeeds, right? The gambling losses and the infidelity. The defense pointed out that Wonggoun had immediately confessed when caught. I love when the defense tries to play these games. Oh, he was caught and he immediately confessed. Bro, he confessed and was caught 12 years later. He was caught 12 years later because he fled and then he confessed. So these games about he confessed immediately, no. But anyway, listen, the defense has to get their wins where they can, right? So they argue that he confessed immediately and now he was fully admitting his wrongdoings, demonstrating remorse and acceptance of responsibility. They reminded the court that until that day, Wonggoun had no history of violence. He was an 18-year Air Force veteran with a perfectly clean record. He was a father, someone who lost control in a moment of extreme emotional stress. Another thing that I love and hate at the same time is when people commit like a quadruple murder or just a murder in general. And the defense is like, they have never done anything like this before. Like, yeah. Thank goodness, right? Like, thank goodness that this is their first offense and that they got caught. But anyway, I digress. I don't know. I'm going off track today because this case is really emotional. I don't know. So in the defense's view, the facts aligned with voluntary manslaughter, okay? An intentional killing, yes, but without that malice of forethought, which means that it was done in a sudden passion as a result of severe provocation. The tension in the courtroom was palpable at this point. You have a defendant who's pleading guilty to a lesser crime. You have the prosecution who is trying to plead up the charge, right? And everyone understood the stakes in this case. If Judge Bird was convinced by the prosecution, Wonggoun could be found guilty of premeditated murder, which potentially meant life in prison. If the judge, though, accepted the defense's argument, the outcome would be a conviction on the lesser charge of voluntary manslaughter, with a correspondingly way lighter sentence. And listen, I do not envy judges at all, ever. My hat's off to all the judges. After weighing all the evidence, all the testimony, and all the arguments, Colonel Bird delivered his verdict on July 30th, 2008. The courtroom, as you can imagine, fell silent as he announced his decision. Saner Wonggoun was found guilty of voluntary manslaughter in the death of his wife, Sopha. That's right, you heard me correctly. The judge found him guilty of voluntary manslaughter. In essence, the judge sided with the defense's characterization of the crime, that it was an unlawful killing committed in the heat of passion rather than a pre-planned, premeditated murder. This was a significant legal distinction that spared Wonggoun the harshest possible penalties. So everyone who's listening or watching right now, what do you think? Do you agree with the judge's conclusion that this was more heat of passion? I don't know. Let me know in the comments because I know that you all have a lot of feelings about these cases. And now that I'm making videos that allows you to do comments, you can share those feelings with me. Okay, so let's talk about sentencing.
What's worse than an ad interrupting your favorite music or podcast? That uninspired coffee you've been drinking while working, which is why Flavia is elevating your everyday coffee experience. Now you can enjoy cafe-quality beverages like coffee, tea, frothy lattes, and creamy hot chocolate made right in your home office, actual office, or wherever you want to upgrade your mug with bold, delicious flavors. Visit Flavia.com to shop the collection of machines and beverages now.
Even for voluntary manslaughter, the punishment under the military law can be severe, given the gravity of the offense, right? Especially with an unborn child as an additional victim. Although, listen, I said this already, the military court did not separately charge the fetal death, but it can still be used as a matter in aggravation, right? Colonel Bird, as the sentencing authority, listened to any final statements and pleas, and he considered aggravating and mitigating factors. On one side, there was the brutality of the killings, right? The loss of 2 lives, Sopha and her baby, and Wonggoun's extensive efforts to escape justice for so long, right? He didn't come forward because he felt so guilty, yada, yada. No, He had to be hunted down. On the other side, there was Wonggoun's long service and lack of prior offenses, as well as his eventual acceptance of responsibility. Ultimately, Colonel Byrd imposed a sentence of 10 years of confinement. Wonggoun was to serve a decade in a military prison. He was also dishonorably discharged from the Air Force, reduced in rank from an E6 to an E1, which is the lowest enlisted grade, and he was made to forfeit all pay and allowances. The sentence was close to what the defense likely hoped for when pursuing the manslaughter route, right? A fixed prison term far below the life sentence that a murder conviction would bring in this case if he had been convicted of premeditated murder. Now, the prosecutors had pressed for a murder conviction, so one can only imagine that they felt disappointed that Wonggoun did not receive more than 10 years. Only 10 years for a life taken and another unborn life may have struck some observers as relatively lenient. Maybe it was influenced by a unique circumstance of provocation in Wonggoun's prior record. We don't know, but I can only imagine that Sopha's family was probably not happy. Wonggoun, now at his sentencing hearing, he was a 60-year-old man, and he sat in the courtroom as the reality of all of this and of his fate sank in. He had avoided a possible life sentence, but he was still set to spend what could be the rest of his 60s behind bars. In a brief statement, Wonggoun, before the judge had actually given the term, Wonggoun did make a statement, and he did express remorse for his actions, an apology of sorts for taking Sopha's life in a rage. He acknowledged that his anger over her gambling debts and infidelity had led him to commit a terrible act. There was no undoing the trauma inflicted on Sopha's family, though, right? Especially not the children who lost their mother, and effectively, they lost their father in one night. However, the conclusion of the court-martial brought a sense of closure after almost 14 years. Justice had finally caught up with Saner Wonggoun. In the wake of the trial, Wonggoun was transported to begin serving his sentence in a military prison. Most likely, he was at the U.S. disciplinary barracks at Fort Leavenworth. FYI, that's where all the men who have lengthy services go to serve out their time. Now, military sentences do undergo an appellate review, and indeed, on April 27th, 2010, a panel of the Air Force Court of Criminal Appeals affirmed Wonggoun's conviction and the 10-year sentence. The higher court found no reversible error in how the trial was conducted, and the evidence supported the voluntary manslaughter verdict, and the punishment was within legal limits, because I think his defense was arguing that 10 years was a little much for voluntary manslaughter. Subsequently, CAF, which is the Court of Appeals for the Armed Forces, the highest military appellate court, declined to further review the case, effectively finalizing the outcome. Wonggoun had exhausted his avenues of appeal, and his fate was sealed by his own admission and the judgment of the Air Force Court. As years passed, Saner Wonggoun served out his sentence quietly. According to the U.S. Bureau of Prisons records, he was released from custody in July of 2013, having likely earned good credit and also for his pretrial confinement time. In all, he spent roughly 5 years after his court-martial in prison, notably way less than the 12 years that he had spent free evading capture. By the time of his release, Wonggoun was in his mid-60s. He left prison as a disgraced Air Force sergeant, stripped of his rank and honors, and returned to life with the weight of the past on his shoulders. I don't know if he returned to Thailand. I really don't. And I don't think that he was required to, actually, after he served out his time. Now, for those who remember the case, the investigators, the friends of Sopha, and certainly Sopha's surviving family, there is a somber mix of feelings when you think about this case, right? Justice, in a sense, was served, but it was delayed and it wasn't as heavy-handed as some might have expected for the loss of 2 lives. Yet the resolution of this case does offer important lessons and a sense of closure. It showcased the relentless dedication of law enforcement agencies. The Air Force OSI and its partners never gave up on finding Wonggoun, demonstrating the reach of justice across any distance or lapse of time. The successful cooperation between the U.S. and Thai authorities in apprehending a fugitive, this collaboration highlighted the importance of international partnerships and law enforcement. In a way, the Air Force kept its promise to Sopha's memory and her family that the accused would one day face accountability, and he did. Thank you so much, True Crime Army, for watching and listening. My heart goes out to Sopha's kids. They are likely in their 40s now. All right, everyone, be sure to subscribe to my channel, to my podcast, wherever you are watching this right now. On my show, I bring you true crime cases involving the military and veteran community, all to highlight one thing. I want you to remain vigilant always, regardless of your surroundings. My sources for today's case include articles written in the San Francisco Chronicle, Phuket Gazette, AP News, court-martial transcripts, OSI press releases, and an appellate court opinion. Until next time, remember, you never really know what someone is capable of, so remain vigilant always. You have a fabulous week, and I'm going to keep digging to bring you another true crime story next time.